Historically, Poisonous Concoction has been one of the best leveling skills and league starters in the game. It's incredibly strong at early game progression and only starts to fall off with almost no investment right at red maps. This league introduced the new transfigured version of the gem, Poisonous Concoction of Bounce Hit, and it's only made this skill better. Playstyle as a whole is incredibly satisfying, and while it still has some issues at the top end, anything under T17s and Ubers will feel trivial with this build. The gear on this build is pretty self-explanatory. Just make sure you have 300 dex and 150 int for danger bait, or you'll lose a ton of damage. For consistent Tanuahi uptime, I like to have my blood rage slightly degenning me. I offset this by my level of vitality, so just make sure that you're adjusting this based off your life pool. Right now I'm using level 17 vitality, so it should be something close to that, but basically you want to be consistently losing and gaining HP, but not fully degenning or fully capping HP. But this doesn't really matter too much as long as you're degenning because of how much life gain on hit you have. I also don't put res on any of my gear, and that's so you don't try to copy it one for one. Just work it piece by piece, and capping res should be super easy for this build with how many rare pieces we have open. On the rare pieces, however, there are specific crafts on the gear that you want to have, at least for the helmet and the belt. The belt craft is what makes it so you regen ES, so you want to make sure that you have that. For your life flasks, you're going to have to run 2 of them, and you want to get as high as you can get for flask recovery rate. The more the better, but buy them based off of your own budget. For the utility flasks, there's a couple different options. You're going to want to run Quicksilver and Granite no matter what, but then you can switch between either Ruby or Quartz Flask. Ruby Flask will give you a little bit more overall max fizz hit, but then Quartz Flask will make it so you can drop the phasing on kill on the tree and a little bit of spell suppression. So there's some trade-offs to either of them. I've used both of them, they both feel perfectly fine. For the enchants on the flask, it's going to change based off of the type of flask that you have. If you have gain on hit flask, then you're going to want to run a recovery mastery, the 4% life when a flask is used, and then you also want to use the enchant flask used when charge reaches full. If you run increased duration flask, then you can have the enchant that makes it so it uses at the end of the flask duration. This will make it so your life flask uptime is slightly better, but you will lose out on some survivability from the recovery mastery. Either option is fine. I've tried both, and honestly I haven't really felt too much of a difference between the two. The goal with this build, and really all of my build, is to serve as a good base that can be upgraded from, and I think that's where this build is at currently. I personally don't care about running T17 or Ubers, and honestly there's just better options out there that exist outside of Poisonous Concoction for that content. This build was made to be cheap and a solid mapper while still having a decent option of scaling. And I personally feel that's right where Poisonous Concoction on Pathfinder is best at. It's a great mid-budget build, but after that it really doesn't make sense to go much further. That's because Pathfinder may initially seem like it has great synergy being reliant on Flask for survivability, though isn't really an option. Since we are constantly using flash charges and forced to run 2 life flasks, you can't really run the traditional triple LE flask setup without having to skip Quicksilver or Quartz Flask. Also, the amount of charges used makes it almost impossible to sustain Taste of Hate without having a ton of investment. But as I said, that's only if you want to push Poisonous Concoction of bouncing past T16s and non-Ubers. Any other content under that threshold is great with this amount of investment. However, if you want to invest more, here's a few different options. One of the best ways to scale damage is just getting Awakened Gems. Awakened Gems are a huge boost to damage, and they're super easy to get. Some of them are a little bit more expensive. I would not suggest spending 20 divines on Awakened GMP for 1 projectile. It's definitely not worth it for the amount that you have to invest in it. You can look into using cluster jewels, but you're going to have to drop some survivability for them. There's a few different good options for cluster jewels. Chaos Clusters with Brood for Potency is really good. Circling Oblivion gives you a ton of damage as well. You can also go to Flask Duration Clusters with Spike Concoction and Brood for Potency, or on Projectile Clusters, there's a node called Follow Through, which is potentially better than the Projectile Mastery since it's always hitting for max value, so that's something interesting to look out for as well. There's always the option to go for a Malevolence Watcher's Eye with Dot Multi. That's like an easy 10% damage increase. Perennis Pact is expensive, but also a way that you can get basically 100% increased chaos damage. The last thing that I would consider doing is a Timeless Jewel, which I would probably do Brutal Restraint. It's pretty nice because you get Dexterity, which will help you get to your cap for Danger Bait much easier, and also give you a little bit of extra spell suppression since we're running Mage Bane. And then on top of that, you can get things like Aura Effect for better survivability and a little bit extra damage, increased poison damage, faster poisons, attack speed, projectile damage. There's just a ton of great mods that you can get on Brutal Restraint, and overall it helps making this build slightly better as well. You can also get some Flask nodes there too, but honestly I don't think it's too worth it to invest that much in Flask nodes since we're mapping for the majority with this build. The leveling with this skill is super easy and very strong. I wouldn't be surprised if this is my league starter next league, just given how strong this skill is throughout the campaign and for the Atlas completion. I'm also going to make a twink leveling guide for Poisonous Concoction, going through some of the speed leveling options as well. But that's pretty much it for this build. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment, and thanks for watching.